solve all of them because the proverbial milk gets spilled. But spent time with that volunteer and worked it through and ended up salvaging that relationship and that volunteer. And that's kind of a joke between the two of them now. Remember the first time I volunteered? And they're a long-time volunteer now. So things like that can happen, and it can be as quick and easy and simple as just a conversation at the time. You guys are also quiet. You were so verbal with Johnny.
You made us talk during our lunch.
Is that it? Or is the food coming out and rather than napping? So volunteer recognition would be looked at. Here's where we're going to really make sure that we're creative, that we are appropriate, and that we're proactive. But volunteer recognition could be looked at as a task, a to-do, but I like to look at it more as an attitude or a philosophy. So if you kind of just approach it from that instead of at the end of the event, we got the chairs set up, and we got the tickets taken, and they want money, and people have fun, and now we have to recognize the volunteers. Take it out of that task list kind of thing and make it more of a philosophy, just a part of who you are and what you do. And then it makes it kind of easier to do it in organic ways as well, instead of just a structured event. And make sure, so have a thought about when do you want to recognize volunteers. And there's no right or wrong answer. It entirely depends on you and your volunteers and how it works for you. Do you want to recognize them at the time that they volunteer? When they leave the organization? Let's say they've been a long-time volunteer. When they leave the organization, do you want to recognize them, at a luncheon later? All of the above? I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, and I don't think you can thank people enough. But just have those thoughts in mind, and then marry those thoughts with this chart here, so nobody gets in trouble. And then going back to a time in your own life when you, again, as a volunteer or as a person, what was it like? How meaningful was it? Did you appreciate the recognition? Was it trite? Did it feel like a script? Was it personalized? What do you want your volunteers to feel like? What do you want at the end of the day from your volunteers? Do you want more than just they came and they helped with the event? Do you want them to be, like I said, lifelong volunteers? Do you want them to now volunteer or help out with other capacities in your organization? What are your goals for your volunteers? So once you know that touches on, the training, the recognition, the recruit, all of those various goals. We all have goals. We all have our strategic plans, our performance reviews, where we're all measured on our goals. So it's not unrealistic that you have goals for your volunteers as well. Now, organizational barriers to recognition. Sometimes people just say, and I use the word say, they don't have time because you have to nobody has time. We all make time. We choose to spend our time in certain ways. Competition among volunteers for recognition. That can happen. That goes back to the whole bag of goodies with volunteers and all the things that come when you have volunteers. Or paid staff not feeling recognized. So some ways that you could, again, mitigate the bullet number 3 there, is you can have a luncheon after the event, the time distance there, to recognize staff and volunteers. And don't make events boring. Volunteer events tend to be, I'm sure yours aren't. But I've been to many boring volunteer events where it feels very scripted and not fun. But I've also been to some where it was fun, it was a party, and you could recognize volunteers for a whole host of things. You could recognize them for the actual work, tasks that they did, for recognize them for helping contribute to the event, maybe this much money, have this many attendees, something on a larger level. You could say, everybody stand up who knows the mission of our organization. Stand up if you had to search for more than 10 minutes for parking this morning. If you knew the executive director or whoever before today's event. So you can throw other elements in there to make it more fun, and again, go back to incorporating a little bit of information about your events, your purpose, your mission. Never shy away from an opportunity to educate an audience. Just do it in a fun way. And then I have seen people, when there's competition for volunteers, you could do it, have the volunteers vote on it, or have different levels, randomize everybody, T-volunteering kind of thing. However you want to do it. There is no right or wrong way. I'd say the wrong way is to not do it, but outside of that. But a couple of things that we can offer that I did not have in January when I was there, but an actual copy of the certificate. Our office has these certificates available for recognition. Maybe, as I said, we are under the direction of the Lieutenant Governor. So these are signed by the Lieutenant Governor. So they're kind of a cool award. We ask that they not be given out to just, that it be more for more substantive volunteering. That doesn't mean it can't be for a day of event, but the caliber of it is such that we like it to be for some, for a greater purpose. Am I articulating this at all? And you can just contact me. It was someone that was at the conference in January when I talked about this without having the sample on it, because it is kind of cool, isn't it? That is pretty. They contacted me after, and here's how they did it. I love the creative part of it. So we had a conversation. He called and talked about, here's what I'm looking for, here's what we're going to do. So what we ended up doing, it was a local bank that had volunteered, had sent like 20 employees to volunteer for the whole planning process. Now, not all 20 volunteers were involved for the whole way, but the 20 volunteers, some were in the planning process for months and months, some were day of, some were, week of, but they had a significant number of employees, so he asked that the certificate be made out to the bank instead of to the employees. That's something that the bank could put on his wall, and he said, and I have an ulterior motive, and that's because I want a donation. Not only did they volunteer and did an outstanding job, but I also want to go back next year and ask them to be a sponsor of this event, and recognizing someone like that can certainly help that way. I was like, I had not even thought of that, and I thought, what a fabulous idea. So that is exactly what we ended up doing. So again, take my business card, contact me if you would like these. It is a really nice way to recognize volunteers. There's also, I talked also about the Utah Philanthropy Day, where they have a Heart and Hands Award. Anyone can recognize a volunteer, and they get a little certificate that says Heart and Hands, and get entered into the program. If you are interested in coming to Salt Lake for that. If not, there are other organizations throughout the state that do things like that, but those are great ways to recognize volunteers. And free, we don't charge for these, so you want to do this is really fun. So awards are more tangible things. The certificates, pins, all of that type of stuff. And events work really well for social volunteers. If you want people to have a more bonding experience with each other, with your staff, whatever, that's a great way. I have one of, and don't ever underestimate the power of socializing and networking. Because oftentimes that is one of the motivations why people volunteer. I have training, one of the trainings that I mentioned, the certificate training for volunteer management coming up at the end of this month. And one of the attendees emailed me and asked, will there be time for networking? And I thought, oh, I love that someone is thinking along those lines. And it's a good reminder that that's pretty integral to the volunteer process for a lot of people. Not for everybody, but for some people. And again, I would just counsel you to make sure that when you're doing this, you read your statute so that you don't overstep the line, because that, I doubt that happens very often, thankfully, but it only takes once for it to be just a bad road altogether.
Can I ask a question? Wonder if we do compensate or give some of these things to our volunteers, could they, and then it puts them back over to a personal where they could be sued, could we have them sign a waiver or a release that if anything happens while they're volunteering, because they would be covered? Or that they couldn't be sued, or they couldn't sue us?
I don't think so, again, because the way that the legislature has set it up for public agencies, for counties, is unlike any other organization. Another organization can have people volunteer for them. They don't need to go through any process. They're just a volunteer for their organization. But for a county or other public agency, the statute says they cannot provide any service. A person may not provide a service to, unless they've been approved as a volunteer. So you can't have somebody that volunteers their time and effort to the county without going through that process. That you absolutely have to do it. The legislature wants you to protect those people as volunteers. So there's no other way to try and do it through agreements or waivers or anything like that. You want to go through the process in the statute. And at the end of the day, the issue with were they compensated or not is a secondary issue. I think a lot of you are taking it more to heart. And I'm glad I scared you. but don't completely change the way that you recruit and keep volunteers. The important thing is finding volunteers to do the work. Be mindful of when you start really giving them a lot, have you crossed that line? Again, a meal ticket, a t-shirt, a pin, things like that. I think we're going to be able to show a judge that that is not compensation. It shouldn't subvert this entire statute where clearly the legislature wants the county to defend that person. But you start saying the only way we can get volunteers is to pay them $2 an hour. Now it's going to be really hard for us to say that meets the letter of the statute. So worry about Pearl's things first. Get your volunteers. Worry about my issues with compensation secondary.
Well, the trainings that I mentioned, if you contact me, I can give you information on. They go more in depth into motivations. And if you know the motivations of volunteers, you can avoid all that because you really don't want a volunteer that does. You don't want somebody there that is only there because you're paying them or because of the ancillary tangible